thanks for having me. I think, like Ash was describing, I have three daughters, I have a wife, so this whole problem that's been in the workforce for a long time is something I think about too. And so it's good to back founders that are focused on solving it. I think at the root of the problem, I think I've seen a lot of people attack the symptoms at the surface, but that hasn't translated into more founded women companies or more leadership in the market. And it's just due to a talent pool that's missing. So I think for everybody that's out there, it's a new time. I think it's a great time to be a founder. It's probably the best time to be a woman founder as well because resources are becoming available to everybody. And to your points, I think yesterday you made at the dinner is like VCs actually don't care at the end. The network is the network because it was built that way. So change the way the network is built is the right solution to it. So,
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
yeah,
Thank you for validating it.
absolutely.
Yeah, and investing in us and our founders. So thrilled to have you, and I'd love to focus on you and your journey. It's very, very inspiring to see how software engineer has gone all the way up to running a multi-billion-dollar business. You've like 4x your employee base. It's a public company. It's just incredibly amazing just to see what's happened in your career journey. So I'd love to understand what actually happened. What was it like
Yeah.
sitting in your seat?
Yeah, no, that's great. Just a quick correction. I'm not the CTO of all of CDW, just over what we call the digital velocity business unit. So we're talking about a portion of the modern CDW.
Oh, I
CDW's been
see.
around a long time. It's an
Right.
old kind of company. We've been public for a long time, but it's a great company, good heart, and lots of great employees. So the journey's been interesting. Never thought I would be in the position I'm at. I was in the position most of your founders like Ava are a decade ago. I was trying to figure out, so going back to my story, I'm a builder. I've known that from an early age. The first computer I ripped apart and broke and then had to fix it. And then made the decision I really, that was fun, but hardware components, pretty easy. You put them together. What about the software, right? So I stopped playing video games and I started trying to figure out how to write the video games instead, right? And so I really started that journey at a young age. At like 13, I started programming and then going through it. My parents, wanted me to go to college, so I did. I kind of look back and go, I kind of wish I'd just gone into creating companies at that age because I was also very passionate about creating businesses and doing something big. But I went through, got a CIS degree, a traditional college, and then went into the workforce and spent a decade in healthcare and in financial services markets, writing software, writing integrations. I'd say I was 21 at the time, and by the time I was 22, I knew I could build anything in the world. And the reason was back then you had to be everything to the company. You weren't just a software engineer. You were the product designer, the product owner, the business analyst, all those jobs. And so, at 21 years old, I distributed $500 million of checks the week of Christmas for a financial settlement.
Wow.
The entire business was betting on me not making a mistake on that. If I'd made a 1% error, I would have put the company out of business, right? Because we were only like a $40 million company at the time. And so, an error of 1 to 10% was going to be a really large.
How did you land up getting that opportunity?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that was just traditional. I think back then it was like the Indeeds of the world, right? Just hitting the job board and getting a job. But I had started working in industry at 18. So I started writing financial or incident command software while I was in college for a company in Chandler. So I had some credibility. I already had a few years of experience as I went through and got my degree. So that helped me get into the market, but it was post 2000.com boom, right? So I went without a job for 8 months and just really focused on what I wanted to do and just landing that role. And then once I was in, I moved pretty quickly into like a team lead role and started managing full application development for them, which was a class action settlement company. Right? So
When I sit down and look at your LinkedIn profile, I can see that you've done that often, right? Where you're basically proven yourself by landing a role and then climbing up. So what are what's the work ethic? What are the relationships you build? Do you seek mentors in the workplace? What can you share?
Yeah, I do now. I didn't in my 20s. I was very naive. So I was a pretty outgoing individual in like high school and as I grew up. But when I went into the workforce, I split myself and decided I have to be professional. I don't necessarily always get along with engineers. I get along more with normal people that aren't engineers. And so I struggled to build relationships with engineers. And some of that might have been arrogance and attitude, right, of my own, that I needed to humble myself and become more open to the idea that my ideas weren't the best ideas in the room all the time, right? And so that was a hard learning. I would say I didn't learn that until I was working at a company called Willamette Dental, and I had made myself all the way up to an architect, right? So I went from being a software engineer to now being the architect of the entire company's software and systems. And I was running this project, and I'd hired 10 brilliant people. 10 people that were at least as smart as me, probably smarter, right? And this is the first time I was challenged in that way as a leader to really, I went and told them, this is how you're going to build the software. That's not what I should have said, right? I said all the way down to the frameworks, like not just the architecture, but you're going to use this and this, we're going to do it this way, and this is why. And, like, I don't know, probably a month into the project, they asked me if I could go to beers with them in the evening. And I didn't realize I was walking into a nightmare, right? Like everybody just brought their grievances out. So that was a time in my life where I had to really humble myself and decide, what do you want to be, the guy that's right or the guy that helps the team win, right? And I think I chose the path, obviously, of helping the team win, and I think that's been a cornerstone for my leadership style.
So they gave you their grievances live.
Yeah,
and you didn't quit and say F off. You basically turned yourself around.
I turned myself around, and at the time, I didn't really believe in the technology choices they were making, but I let the team make the choices. For me, the learning experience was probably more about hiring and not putting too many strong opinions on the same team, right? Like, we got into a situation where, the first thing was, we're going to build this. I wanted to build it web native. I saw the future as web native. They saw it as Silverlight. I think we all know what happened to Silverlight, right? It's not in the market anymore.
Right.
But that was as a leader, I had to let them make that mistake, right, and make that choice. And so for me,
you let them pick Silverlight.
So I let them pick Silverlight. They succeeded from a technical standpoint, but they failed to ship to the business, right? And so there's this lack of balance, and I think you'll find that in your engineering workforce. We are purists, engineers. I think by our culture, builders they want it to be perfect.
Yeah.
And obviously, there's a great quote out there. It's eluding me right now, but it's like the art of perfection is the enemy of good, or something like that. But
perfect is the enemy of good.
Perfect is the enemy of good. Yeah, that's the quote. And what that's really saying is you don't really learn anything until you ship something, right? And get it in front of your actual users and collect that feedback. And we failed to do that, so that project ended up getting killed. And it was really over the same thing they took me to drinks about, which was they kept changing technology decisions instead of building business value. And so probably the biggest thing in learning there is focus on delivering value to the business, right? Or to your user group. And be humble enough to know that maybe the first thing you deliver or the 10th thing you deliver is not right on the mark, and you're still going through that product market fit. And that's really your job. Your job is to listen. And so that actually translates into sales if you're a founder, because if you walk into the room and you tell the customer what they need, they're going to ask you to politely walk out of the room and never talk to you again. But if you go and you say, what are your problems? How do I help you? And you listen, they're going to give you every opportunity to help solve their problem.
Interesting. So you're a people person, interestingly.
Yeah.
Right? You're like listening to customers, and you're bringing your team along, and you're open to negative feedback. Those are like big challenges for me, which is kind of why I'm doing what I am. And I didn't last in engineering. 7 years, I was like, I'm out of here. There are no women, and everybody thinks they're smarter than me, and I can't outwit them. So I am the smartest. I'm going to go to marketing and work there instead. And I did, and I had lots of lunch buddies. But I think you've endured those nuances of early growth in engineering. And then tell me more, what happened after that? Like, you've been a software engineer for a long time, and then all of a sudden you're like, 9 years, you're...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Overnight success, right? Yeah.
It feels like
no
that.
No hard work, it just happens, right? Like it does in the news. I saw my path pretty clearly. I was passed up for leadership opportunities due to, similar to you, people feeling challenged. Like my CTO at the time feeling challenged by me and feeling like I could succeed. And so I finally had a manager come in, and he was honest with me in 2 years in a row. He said, we would love to keep paying you. We know that we're paying you a lot for what you do based on where we're at in this company at the time. And there's no track to a CTO here, and you're the kind of guy that should be a CTO. And he was just very honest. And it's probably the best leader I've worked for in my career. They just gave me valuable, true feedback instead of just giving me the runaround. And so that was the point at which I said, okay, Phil, you've been doing this for 10 years. You've always wanted to be an entrepreneur. You've failed to launch 100 ideas, right? That you've seen other people take to market and be successful. Why don't you just go do something? And so, I started by starting a boutique consulting firm. And so I took what I knew how to do, the work inside the company, and I created a consulting company. And what I learned through that journey was, man, you can't scale from 1 to 10 if you're doing the sales, the marketing, the engineering, and you're tied up at the customer for 40 hours a week, right? That becomes 2 jobs. You're working in the evening. And so I went back to the idea of focusing on product, and, I created a number of founder failures, I'll call them. Like I failed to figure out how to pick a good founder to do the work with. And so those were 6-month journeys that turned into nothing. And then finally, I landed on the right idea. It turned out it wasn't the right team, but we were able to build a product and get it at Techstars and get funding. And so I moved from boutique consulting into product engineering and focus, and really learned a
What
lot.
was that idea?
So that was a serverless cloud computing platform right
Okay.
before AWS
Serverless cloud
Lambda
computing.
launched, right? So we were building essentially a backend in a box, at the time is what we'd
Right.
call it. But everything a developer needed a node developer to ship an application, but only focus on building the UI. And so all the backend architecture was no ops, scalable, MongoDB databases that would automatically geographically scale, as well as, it was built on Docker at the time. So Docker Swarm prior to Kubernetes. So the entire fabric for the building and shipping your app. And it was successful. We had one paying customer by the time I left, but I didn't still have the right founding team. And that was a lesson for me. And so I ended up exiting that company. And when I did, I ended up meeting my co-founders in the new venture that we ended up selling to CDW in 2020, which was largely built on the same philosophy as the idea of DevOps, automation, things that I had been doing for over a decade, but the market still didn't understand. And to me, I didn't really understand that. Sometimes I miss the mark because I think people understand more than they do when it comes to the enterprise. So we took that, we packaged that really as a consulting company. We took a lot of the ideas from the platform. And so, we bet on Kubernetes knowing that it was going to be a leader. We were early on it. Our first customer was a major migration from data center to AWS on Kubernetes. And then we slowly built really a full stack, modern cloud native professional services arm. And over the course of 3 years, we grew it to 250 people, and we exited that to CDW at the time. It was in the pandemic.
How much did you have in revenues at the time?
I don't think I can publicly share that because it hasn't been disclosed in the market.
I'm curious.
But it was
what can you say about the scale? How many customers? How many
hundreds
employees?
of customers,
Wow.
lots of Fortune 50s, right?
Oh, wow.
And so it was very anti-startup. Everything I learned in the startup world is build a product, sell it to SMB, then go up to enterprise.
Right.
It was the opposite of that. It was large consulting contracts at large customers.
Fortune 50 companies.
At Fortune 50
my
companies.
gosh.
So I think that was also valuable because you learn the journey that Timothy just described, which is I thought a 6-month sales cycle was long. 18 months in enterprise is pretty common, especially in a high compliance vertical, right? Like oil and gas or financial services. So 6 months is actually really good. And we were kind of on that trend too as we were selling. The way we did that was, and I shared a little bit of this last night with Timothy, is reverse channel. So we built our go-to-market with a very lean sales team and went through VAR and resale partnerships to sell our services. So things that they needed to offer their customers that they didn't have in their briefcase. And that was very successful, and that's what led to CW getting excited about us. They were our best partner. And when we went out for funding, they offered an acquisition deal. And at the time, with the pandemic looming, we weren't sure if it was going to be a boom situation or a bankrupt situation. We had 250 people, so we ended up doing what I would call an early exit on that company. We probably could have, our plan was to take it to 5 years and a little bit more maturity, but got bought by an amazing company. They continued to fund us. They continued to support us. We continue to acquire companies and grow and scale. And so it's been a really good journey.
And the team stayed, and you supported the transition of all your employees. How did you go about that?
Correct. Yeah. I think we retained 100% of the employees almost through the 3-year term of the agreement. And then, as you get larger and larger, it's not for everybody. So we moved from being a startup minded to a large scale enterprise, moving from 250 to 2,000 people. And so certain people, that's not for them. It's not their jam. And so they moved to different roles. But, I think thinking about that too, as you think about your talent workforce, is you can be upset when one of your employees decides that it's not for them, and you can let that relationship die, or you can continue to invest in them. And I'm, as you mentioned, a people person. So I believe the best thing I've done in this world is actually helping other people build their skills and become, better and more mature in the market, not the technology I've built. I've built lots of technology over the years, and some of it's running, some of it's not. But the people that I've built, they last a lifetime, right?
That's
and
true.
They're appreciative for the hand that you've given them, the help that you've given them. So I think that's probably the biggest leader lesson is continue to invest in those people. And, my co-founders really helped me through that journey, because I would say I was very engineer when I went into this business. Even though I'd done a number of startups, I had all the knowledge for how to execute, but I hadn't ever operationalized any of it. I hadn't done it, right? And so, having them help me through interviews and understand how to find good candidates. I got really good at spotting candidates in interviews and lasting people from cultural values through, can they actually do what they say they can do? But also when you're letting go of those people because they were great talent you hired, help them find a job, support them. What ends up happening is they become raving fans of you and your business, and the ecosystem expands, right? So I call it, so the original network effect, right? By word of mouth is, somebody that I let go ends up at Google. Google brings more business.
That's
because that employee is raving about working at our company, right?
Absolutely. I think the Valley is proof of that, right? I worked for an engineering manager who was a CTO of Okta, Like everybody's like that. I went to grad school with Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and they started Google. So
Yeah.
the Valley is proof of that. It's like you have this history of who you are and all your mistakes living in the minds of all these human beings. Um, so tell us more about how you transition. You go from this, engineer, entrepreneur, all of a sudden you're working in this massive organization. The overwhelm of processes and structure and approvals, does it exist for you, or you somehow bypass all of that, and how do you shine?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it was easier for me than some other people in my organization because I was high enough up that I had a lot of support, right? I had lots of managers working for me. I had
Mm,
an executive assistant, all these things, right, that you need in a big company because there's so much burden of process. That's the hardest part, I think, is doing the management activities.
mm-hmm,
I enjoy coaching the employees. I enjoy helping the employees. I enjoy building the product, jumping into the code. I don't enjoy doing performance reviews. I don't enjoy some of the things that you have to do in a big
mm-hmm.
company, right? To stay within compliance
Great.
and to also ensure that when the company puts a budget together, if you didn't do an employee review, your employees aren't going to get a piece of that budget, right?
Uh-huh.
when you go to dole out the money. So yeah, there's the growing up side of that, and that's really the scaling aspect of it. I think we were able to maintain very much a startup type culture within a large organization, which was great. But there comes a time where you hit a scaling point where the business has to make decisions to optimize, and so you have to start coming in line with what the corporate standards are around things like
I see.
travel and
Yeah.
expenses, and all these things, right? So I think that was the challenge, was understanding, and these rules are changing a lot because we're also transforming an entire large company, right? So one year it's using one system, the next year it's using another. I think the hardest thing was probably system toil, and getting visibility into your business can be a challenge when
Mm-hmm.
you don't have a good strategy.
And then I think the service integrator business, which is what you're in, is very different than product company. You're like shipping off a bunch of very smart engineers to go build product which you cannot touch and feel and debug and play with yourself. How do you manage quality and control, and how do you do that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that translates. If you have a good product team, you should have good quality standards. You should have engineering standards. You should have architecture standards, right? And so making sure that you do that when you're building a professional services organization is just as important, right? To ensure that if we're out building Java apps, we're either following the company standard that we're with, or if they don't know how to build Java apps, we have our own standard that we're following, right? We're following a standard agile scrum type process to do development, which that served us well. I think the consulting companies before us had proprietary processes a lot of times, and that was their value in the market. We chose to be, industry standard compliant agile, which worked really well when you got into Fortune 50 because then they were doing agile safe, and it was like, yes, we can do that with you. Let's go to your PI planning, and that turned into more work, so it ends up becoming a sales thing. Um, I think that's. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, it's more about the way of managing engineering as a service integrator,
Yes.
CTO, especially because it feels a bit like that to be running a venture firm in this strange way that you're delivering services. You're taking care of people. You cannot touch and feel the code, right? And you're trying to like
Yes.
empower them remotely and try give them more funding and see if somehow they'll succeed and show you returns. And it's one removed from everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
So
think it's having a good process around it, right? I think is
yeah.
where I was going with that. And I've never really actually saw it different than building a product, because when you build a product
Mm,
team, you still have to have a roadmap. You have to have objectives and a goal. And so in the services world, you're still going to run write a scope of work, and that becomes your product, right? And
right.
your backlog and your roadmap that you're managing to. Now, there are problems with that all the time, right? And that was a hard thing to overcome. And so you have a layer of people. That was me in the early days, jumping in and doing oversight with the project team, making sure that what they're saying is what the customer's hearing and
Right.
saying as well, right? So you do have a quality control issue there that's different than product, where product you might be able to do NPS
Yeah.
and see a lot of things through the data. You don't have that data feed, and so you're usually asking your project managers to collect that data. And so we ended up doing NPS scoring and stuff, right? Every time we closed a project, we asked our customer, "Would you refer us to another customer?"
And then I'm guessing you're implementing a lot of AI related technologies. And how do you manage quality around LLMs and hallucination in all these remote products?
Yeah, I would say we're still in the very founding stages, and mostly that's because the customers are still very in the founding stages. So
Mm.
we're getting into projects where we're doing LLMs and we're doing quality, and I think as an industry that's evolving. So we're out on the front lines trying to figure that out. I think it's a matter of just testing. So no different than your applications that you write that are SaaS. You need to go through a ton of testing against the LLM outputs to ensure that it's going to be consistent and repeatable, and then do your prompt tuning to get to where you're at.
But
Um,
it's very manual, I feel. for all the automation we'll end up delivering with AI. Like one of the things we did deliver for AT&T was using LLMs to automate customer support, and this would clean up 40% of their tickets.
Yep.
Except when you put a human on it, it'll be like a lot of hallucination and garbage, and so we were introducing errors in their customer tickets, which is why I promptly exit by sale. But
yeah, so I mean, I think what the team is doing is there's an evolving pattern in the market that's like I forget what they call it. There's a specific term for it, but I'll call it the adjudicator. It's another agent that's sitting there,
right,
testing the outputs from the other agent that generated them.
Right.
So you're not just blindly doing that. And so in the past, we'd call that permutation testing or something, right? Where we run thousands of regressions or
That's
millions
right.
of regressions against the data set to ensure that it's consistent. And
So do you have
the
like
response
best
is good.
practices you publish for your teams to adopt in order to do that? Or how do you
Yeah, I
do
would say
it?
that's an evolving area, right? The
Yeah.
technology is evolving very, very quickly. So yeah, just like any other engineering project, you need to have standards. You need to have, a very defined scope. The idea that they should just use whatever LLM is probably not the right approach. I think enterprises are not necessarily going to adopt Llama as an example unless they have an open source policy. So my team's not focused on Llama and open source. They're focused on working with paid tooling that can be adopted within the enterprise. And so I think setting those standards and then setting standards around quality and governance is important.
How do you stay on top of all the new innovation that's coming out on a monthly basis, weekly basis? What do you do?
Well, similar to what Ava said, I'm in like 12 tabs. I'm running Gemini for this. I'm running Claude for that. I'm running ChatGPT for something else. I don't have as many niche tools. I kind of stick to the 3 LLMs. But then I'm also, I'm very much in that dark web also that Ash talked about. I'm doing a lot of research before I ever call a partner or hit a website or have a customer conversation. That's mainly how I stay on top of it. And then I listen to some great podcasts, VC20 is a really good one.
Yeah.
And then I've been listening to AZ16 a lot. I've always followed Mark Andreessen and his fund. And I feel like he's one of those visionaries that sees what's around the corner. They posted a great one yesterday that would be Timothy's line of work is, the market for AI probably isn't the biggest market. It's really the $6 trillion services market that AI will start to displace that you should focus on. And so those are the types of solutions that I've kind of geared my mind to as well and getting more engaged around. But those are my primary channels. I spend a lot of time either in the plane or in the car. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts to just consume information and test ideas or validate ideas that I've had that other people now are talking about.
And do you have like a team of people who are experimenting on your behalf?
Yeah, so I built a team of chief architects, and their role and responsibility was to sit between the customer and the manufacturer or the software provider. A lot of times what happens is there will be a go-to-market built by a vendor that thinks this is the path, but then when the technology hits the customer, they see a different use case for it, right? And so the chief architect's responsibility is to become an expert at the technology, but also an expert at what the customer needs and what the customer wants. And so, for AI, as an example, I have a chief architect of AI that is constantly working with NVIDIA, but also working with the customers, early solutions, prototypes, and listening to the kind of signals on the ground.
Any questions from the audience? Yes, Ash.
Awesome. So,
Give him the
great story, Phil. Coming from a bigger company as well, or a couple of big companies, I can appreciate the scale, but I also appreciate where you started from. The passion for the idea and growing it. I think as Mala said, typically we see through the venture-backed kind of funding and this kind of route, you see more solutions of products. This is very unique. It's a services consulting kind of a gig. Can you walk us through how do you go from like your first customer or no customer to maybe one and then grow that to 10? And how, more importantly, yes, you got to about 250 people. Is that the end scale before you moved on to CDW? How do you actually create that services consulting company to actually be something that either could be bought out, you can do something more with? Like, how do you actually scale a company that's around consulting? Like, I know you need your frameworks. There's always a solution architecture behind the scenes that you apply at customers, etc. Help me. If I was to start something like this, what would I need to do?
Yeah, so big question. There's a lot of pieces that go to, I think, just answering the how do you get from 0 to 1 with the customer, right? When you don't have a big reputation in the market. I think for us, it was partnerships, and that was really the genius of our CEO at the time. He had built a number of channel businesses, and so he had lots of connections to OEMs and to resellers. And so To all of you out there that are building product, a really great channel is the room that we're in here, Google. They have a marketplace. You can go to market through that channel very, very quickly, and it's an easy path for your customers to contract. So I would do that first off. AWS, GCP, Azure, they all have marketplaces to allow your customer to buy, and that is two things for the customer. One, it's an easy path to contracting, and two, it goes against their commit. So what they're buying through the marketplace helps their commitments they've already made it as a business. So it's a really easy path. The other thing I would say there is I believe in the channel. I don't think it's going away. I met Sumo Logic about 5 years ago in Vegas, and they came to me and said, look, we overshot our IPO. We got to like 250 million, but we never built the channel. And so now we're turning around. We need to build the channel. So I think that's something that, like, in the venture world, they don't talk a lot about, because partnerships can suck time too. If you don't have the right partnerships, you can spend a lot of time when you should be doing product market fit, making the first sale. But there is a time when that becomes your accelerator. The next is, like, how do you actually build the business? It's all humans. This business was all humans. So I thought about it just like building an engineering organization within a company, right? I have to have good, strong leaders on every project that can cover our bases, and they should be the ones developing the standards for the teams that are working in that technology. We covered 15 languages from a software development standpoint, everything from Node.js to Rust. Like, we wrote a web integration for Mozilla using Rust. That was one of our early projects. We didn't have any Rust developers at the time, so we took one of our leads that was really good at programming, and he hired a team and ran that. But it's about creating that governance model and those standards, and that governance starts at the sales process, because if you don't understand what you're going to do for the customer, then you have a really hard time controlling quality out the other side. And so you're building that engine. And then, we were fortunate enough to buy a staffing company first. And so part of that, a challenge for any new business, is recruiting, right? Like, how quickly can you get the right people? And if you just go out to the market for recruiting agencies, you're going to get 50 resumes a week. Their job is to send you resumes. It's your job to filter those and figure out how to hire the right candidates. So what we did was we pruned that engine, that existing recruiting engine that we had. We tailored it to only the things that we were going to serve. So if you thought of our portfolio as products, we had cloud over here. We weren't doing, honestly, lift and shift. I was part of my arrogance and like technology choices. I'm like, nobody should ever lift and shift. I missed a lot of opportunities sitting doing that, right? So that I look back at and I was like, well, I probably should have done lift and shift and then modernize with my customer, which I learned through our partnership journeys with Google and others. Like, hey, will you help clean up this mess this customer's lifting and shifting? We started doing that work. So I think building a good portfolio as a services leader is very important. No different than building a product backlog of capabilities and roadmap. Like, are you going to support SAP or Oracle, or are you not? Because that's a really big choice if you're doing database systems. Or do you have the expertise to support that? Every deal looks good to a CEO is also what I learned, right? Cash coming in the business, like, awesome, we're in services. Why couldn't we do it? Well, it's not smart for us to do it, right? We should double down on Google. We should double down on AWS. We should double down in the core areas where we've chosen our competencies. So some of that goes back to like just company founding and like, what's your mission? What are your values? What is your strategic intent in the market? What are you trying to do? No different than a product founder saying, we're going to go solve X, Y, and Z. We chose DevOps and automation. That led to cloud native and modern software engineering patterns and practices.
What I love about this conversation is how you're able to be open and welcoming of the mistakes you've made. And so you learn from it. I think it's beautiful and very humbling to watch you do that. So I'm going to bring it down to a round of close. If you have more questions, you can always approach our speakers after, during the breaks. But would love to hear maybe a few of our rapid fire style here. Most underrated skill in engineering leaders.
Humility.
Humility, which is exemplifying here on stage. Overhyped trend in cloud or AI?
I would say it's AI. I mean, I think I believe in the long tail AI journey, but the market's been in a mode of panic for 3 years or 4 years now, and the results aren't there, right? So, I was telling somebody yesterday, don't wait to start building what you think is the right thing just because you think the LLM will have that in a quarter or two. It may or it may not. And find your moat and build value and keep doing it. Cloud, to me, is a no-brainer, but it's not about going to cloud. It took 5 years, I think, for Andreessen Horowitz to confirm that for me. But I was telling all my customers, cloud's not about the destination. It's about the journey. It's about changing the operating model. So it's about abstracting your architecture and being able to run it anywhere. And because most businesses are not capital efficient when running in the cloud. And I saw another post this morning from 36 Signals, which said that. He said, last year we moved out of the cloud, we saved $4 million.
Yes.
Right. And so you would be crazy if you don't start in the cloud, but you're insane if you stay in the cloud. And that was actually a quote from Andreessen Horowitz article on companies.
And I've experienced that hands-on working at Cloudera, where they didn't have a cloud strategy because most of the customers didn't want to move to the cloud. Now, that was a bad decision for Cloudera because Amazon came along and ate their everything, not just their lunch, right? I mean,
Yep.
there was nothing left. But there are still customers who don't want to move to the cloud, and these are financial institutions, and these are the real organizations that run the world. I think oil and natural gas, many of these companies. So it's a trust factor. And do you see that happening with AI as well?
Yeah, I think we went through a market paralysis in 23. We all thought we started built services to go to market with AI, and we did a bunch of POCs, hundreds of POCs that resulted in the customer realizing they didn't have the right plumbing to do what they wanted to do with the AI, right? And they didn't have the ability to even put a policy in place, right? So it really does take us back to 2000s. Like, do you remember the first thing everybody did when the internet went live? Can't use the internet, right? The first policy was you cannot use the internet. That was the first policies we saw in the enterprise around AI. It was you cannot use AI, right? And they had no way to block it, but they had a physical agreement now, an employment contract that said if you use it, the risk is on you, not us, right? So I think that was the hardest part. Is we thought the market would move quicker on AI. What we're seeing now, though, 3 years later, is companies that we thought would be laggards, that would still be holding out, saying, I'm a financial company, I'm a large national bank.
Yeah.
They're going all in, and they're seeing a future the way that I see the future that I saw in 23, they're starting to see now. And so sometimes, they talk about what's the 3 things you need to have a great business: the right idea, the right team at the right time, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And so a lot of you may have felt that as well, like lacking product adoption, where you feel like your product should just be flying off the shelves because this AI thing's amazing. Hold out, raise the right amount of funding, figure out what that timing is, right, as you get the product market fit, because people do want your products, but most of them don't even understand what it means to run AI, let alone be AI native. And I would say all of you should be thinking AI native. Like all of your businesses should be thinking about deploying agents, not humans at this point. Humans when needed, but deploy agents until you absolutely require a human in the middle.
If not tech, what would you be doing?
I would probably be running an excavation company. When I bought my property in Texas, I bought 2 pieces of equipment, and I realized I really enjoy just sitting there for 8 hours and moving dirt.
That sounds like my son when he was 4 years old.
Yep.
Excavation company. Well, big round of applause. Thank you so much, Phil. It's been an honor to host you. Thank you.